When we think of Xerxes' invasion of Greece, what comes to mind? Is it the massive Persian army, the brave 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, or the decisive naval battle at Salamis? These are the stories of kings and soldiers, of grand strategy and heroic last stands. But there's a darker, more personal side to this war, one that's often overlooked in our textbooks and blockbuster movies. It's the story of the women of Hellas, the daughters, wives, and mothers who face the terrifying reality of an invading army. What Xerxes and his forces did to them was far worse than you might imagine. Today, we're peeling back the layers of history to uncover the brutal, untold stories of the Greco-Persian Wars. This isn't just about battles and tactics. It's about the human cost of conquest, a cost paid most heavily by the most vulnerable. We'll explore the historical accounts, piecing together the grim reality from the writings of Herodotus and others, to understand the true nature of the violence inflicted upon the women of ancient Greece. This is a story of suffering and resilience, and it's a crucial part of understanding the full horror of Xerxes' campaign. Let's start with the fundamental principle of ancient warfare. Conquest was not just about territory. It was about domination, and a key part of that was the subjugation of the conquered people. For the women of a fallen city, this meant a fate often considered worse than death. When a city was sacked, it was a free-for-all. The invading soldiers, having risked their lives in battle, felt entitled to the spoils of war. And those spoils included not just gold and treasures, but people. Women, in particular, were seen as valuable prizes. The historical record is chillingly clear on this. Herodotus, our primary source for the Persian Wars, describes the fall of cities in Ionia, a region of Greek city-states in modern-day Turkey that fell under Persian control before the main invasion. When the Persians crushed the Ionian revolt, Herodotus tells us they would take the most beautiful boys and castrate them, and drag the most beautiful girls to the king. The rest of the population was often enslaved. This wasn't a rare occurrence, it was standard procedure. Now, apply this template to the main invasion of Greece. As Xerxes' massive army swept down from the north, city after city faced a terrible choice: submit or be destroyed. Many cities in Boeotia and Thessaly chose to medes, to side with the Persians out of sheer terror. They knew what resistance would mean for their people. But for cities like Athens, Thebes, and Plataea, which chose to fight for freedom, the consequences were catastrophic. Let's focus on Athens. After the Greek forces made their stand at Thermopylae and Artemisium, the path to Athens was open. The Athenian leader Themistocles convinced the citizens to evacuate the city. Putting their faith in their navy, their wooden walls, most of the men went to the ships or to the island of Salamis, while the women, children, and elderly were evacuated to nearby islands like Aegean and the Peloponnesian city of Troezen. Imagine the panic, the chaos of that mass exodus. Families were separated, abandoning their homes, their temples, everything they had ever known, with the Persian army hot on their heels. But not everyone left. A small group of defenders remained on the Acropolis, the sacred heart of Athens. When the Persians arrived, they found a nearly empty city. They besieged the Acropolis, and after a short but brutal fight, they stormed it. Herodotus tells us that once they took the high ground, they plundered the temple and burned the entire Acropolis. They killed the defenders, many of whom had sought sanctuary in the holy places. Any who were captured, especially women who might have stayed behind, would have faced the same grim fate as those in other sacked cities. The destruction of Athens was total and absolute, an act of punitive vengeance. The story of the small city of Thespia is even more tragic. Thespia had sent 700 hoplites to fight and die alongside the Spartans at Thermopylae. When the Persian army arrived at their city, they found it deserted. In retaliation for their defiance, Xerxes' forces burned Thespia to the ground. The fate of any inhabitants who failed to escape would have been enslavement or death. The neighboring city of Plataea, which also sent men to fight the invaders, suffered the same fate. These were not just military actions. They were acts of terror designed to break the spirit of Greek resistance. The fear of what would happen to their women was a powerful motivator for the Greek soldiers. Before the Battle of Salamis, as the Greek commanders debated whether to fight or flee, the Corinthian leader Edemantus insulted Themistocles, saying a man without a city had no right to speak. Themistocles' reply was sharp and telling. He declared that as long as they had 200 ships, they had a city greater than Corinth, because those ships held the power to protect their families and retake their lands. The fight wasn't just for abstract ideals like democracy or freedom. It was a desperate struggle to protect their wives and daughters from the horrors of enslavement and sexual violence. We see this fear echoed in Greek literature and art from the period. Plays like Aeschylus's The Persians, written by a veteran of the wars, portray the grief and loss of the Persian court, but they also subtly reinforce the terror of what could have happened to the Greeks. The theme of women captured in war is a common and painful trope in Greek tragedy, reflecting a very real and present danger. Let's break down exactly what enslavement meant for a woman in the ancient world. It wasn't just forced labor. For women captured in war, it almost invariably meant becoming a sexual slave. They would be distributed among the soldiers and commanders as property, their bodies no longer their own. They would be forced into concubinage, bearing children for their captors who would also be born into slavery. Their identity, their family, their entire past would be erased, replaced by a life of servitude and abuse. This is the reality that is so often glossed over. The stakes of the Greco-Persian Wars were not just political. For every man fighting on the battlefield, there was a woman, a child, a family whose entire existence hung in the balance. The evacuation of Athens wasn't just a strategic retreat. It was a desperate flight from a fate of mass rape and enslavement. The burning of Thebes and Plataea wasn't just the destruction of buildings. It was the obliteration of homes and the brutal punishment of a people who dared to resist. So when Xerxes crossed the Hellespont, he didn't just bring an army. He brought a wave of terror that threatened to drown Greek civilization. The threat was not just to their soldiers and their cities, but to the very fabric of their families and their future. The men who fought at Salamis and Plataea weren't just fighting for Greece. They were fighting for their wives, their sisters, and their daughters. They were fighting to prevent the horrors that had already befallen so many others. The resilience of the Greek people in the face of this brutality is astonishing. The Athenians, after their city was reduced to ashes, returned and rebuilt. The women who endured the terror of evacuation and displacement returned to raise a new generation in a free Athens. Their stories are not recorded with the same detail as those of the generals and politicians, but their suffering and their strength were the foundation upon which the victory was built. It's vital that we remember this part of the story. History is more than just a list of battles and dates. It is the collective experience of humanity, in all its glory and its horror. What Xerxes did to the daughters of Hellas was a campaign of systematic terror and subjugation, a weapon of war as powerful as any spear or ship. By understanding this, we get a much truer, much darker, and ultimately, much more complete picture of what was truly at stake in the Greco-Persian Wars. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a difficult but important topic. History is full of these hidden stories, and exploring them helps us understand our world better. If you found this video insightful, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more content that goes beyond the surface of history. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious.